true stories
that make us say,
wow, God.
wow, God.
Wow, God.
I did not know how to swim. Suddenly, I felt hands lift me up above the water, but I was still by myself, and there was nobody there.
The one thing I will say is he came and got me.
And when he looked at me, he didn't just look at me. He saw my pain. He saw the humanity in me that nobody else could see. And what I saw in him were the eyes of God.
Hi, I'm Rob Vischer. And as a kid, I was kind of a Bible nerd. To prove my point, in first or second grade, I asked for a David and Goliath action figure set that was displayed in my church's bookstore. And I watched Hanna-Barbera's animated version of David and Goliath on repeat. I also dressed as David for my Christian school's harvest party. I still remember the short white robe, a brown handmade vest, sandals, and a leather sling, which I never quite mastered. David was my hero. After all, he had lots of faith, and he killed and beheaded a giant that was twice his size. When I heard stories about David, I heard a story of a kid who, against all odds, killed a giant. The problem is, that's not really the story. The story isn't about David being the hero. The story is about God. God used an unlikely shepherd to free Israel from the Philistines. As with most Old Testament stories, God is the hero of the story. He's the one who rescues his people. In Psalm 34:22, David writes, "The Lord will rescue his servants. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned." Today, you're going to hear 3 stories of people who, like David, have seen God rescue his servants in miraculous ways. This is Ryan Graves.
About 5 years ago, I was pretty convinced I was a Christian, pretty convinced I had a decent grasp on things. I was a software engineer, but I couldn't stop drinking. I had been a really bad alcoholic for about 30 years since I was about 14. Started getting a little bit sick here and there, got pancreatitis really bad, and was diagnosed with chronic pancreatitis, acute pancreatitis. I don't know if you've ever had it or know anybody that's ever had it, but it's extremely painful. And when I was diagnosed with it being chronic, I had hit my knees that morning on a trail at Smithville Lake here in Missouri. And I was like, how can I not kick this? And I was begging God to please help me out. Well, he did, but he did it in that form instead of a different form. It wasn't like I woke up and the birds were chirping. I got extremely sick. So that was the answer to that. And it was very loud and clear to me that that's what had happened. So I did okay with that for a while. And then COVID hit. And a lot of people that battle addiction had a rough time with that too. So I kind of started dabbling again. I didn't have anything to do. The gym was closed, the parks were closed, everything. So I started again, not horribly, but enough. Of course, more pancreatitis attacks, and went to the hospital a couple times. But this time I had started walking by the mirror and I was dropping weight, like 10 pounds a week. And it was all muscle because I had spent a ton of time in the gym and a ton of time out running and hiking around, trying to be as healthy as possible, trying to keep myself from drinking. And they said, yeah, it's probably your pancreas. You have a little bit of a fatty liver, but other than that, just don't drink too much. I started getting very sick now. You get what's called ascites, and it's fluid buildup in your legs and your abdomen, and it's wildly uncomfortable. I ended up to the point where once COVID was really letting go, I was not in shape to be able to even work anymore. I couldn't tell one day to the next whether or not I was going to be able to get up. And I had been starting to read the Bible a little bit. I mean, just little tiny choppy bits here and there, not thinking about it much. Went to the hospital a couple of times. And finally, the third time, they kept me there. And they told me that I was not going to last 3 months. I had gone too far. I had end-stage liver disease, which stage 3 survival rate was about 6%. Within probably a month, I lost 20 pounds more. And I was down to at that point 123 pounds, which was about 80 total. So I looked just like a yellow skeleton. Throughout all this, I had no concept of time. When you have liver disease, also, it floods your brain full of toxins. And I was never afraid. I felt okay. I felt like they were wrong. And I told them this. Throughout this, I had contracted a deadly virus, all kinds of stuff. Liver disease is bizarre. It affects everything. But this whole time, I'm growing closer to God. And I'm not really sure how it's happening. I'm not reading the Bible. I'm not really reading anything. I'm just kind of laying there. But it's almost like I'm a captive audience, and he's reaching in and working as I'm laying there with nothing I can really do. Eventually, I get let out a little bit early, and I really had no concept of time. I called the job that I came up here to take, and they told me that they had since had to let somebody else have it because it's been 8 months. And I was like, what do you mean it's been 8 months? I've been laying in bed for 8 months. So they started getting worried about me bleeding, because that's another one of the side effects, is that you will contract bleeds through your esophagus or your stomach or your liver. So I ended up with them in my liver. And I won't go into gory detail, but the first one, I lost a crazy amount of blood, and I was immediately in the ICU, put on blood transfusion. They ended up having to do surgery, and they got it to stop. But then it started again a couple of days later. About 70% of the blood in my body was gone. My blood pressure was like in the 50s, 40s. And so the first time I knew something had happened, but it wasn't as clear. The second time, I was essentially dead for about 26 minutes. They were scared to do surgery in the first place. It's such a tedious thing having liver disease that the head liver doctor was the only one that I could see. I couldn't go to a different hospital. I couldn't do anything like that. So I had to see Dr. Alba at St. Luke's. And she was just 100% sure pretty much that she was going to lose me that night. I woke up a couple days later. I knew something had happened. The first thing I noticed was I didn't hurt anymore. I was grabbing the doctor and I was like, what is going on? And she said, your body's going into shock. You're drowning and you're bleeding to death. I was like, okay, well, how do I stop this shock thing from happening? Because the other part of me was not in shock. So it just seemed absurd that I couldn't stop that. So after going through surgeries for a couple of days, I came out of it and they still were thinking there's no way. And all that my doctor kept saying was, oh, buddy, you're so sick. He came and got me. And one of the first things I did when I was able to go back to the house was, give thanks. So I immediately started reading the Bible and I started going to church. And I volunteered right when I got there. I want to teach a Bible study class. It's like, man, you just picked up a Bible. And I was like, I'm ready. So I started teaching a Bible study class and started ministering to the prisoners, just doing whatever I could for the church. The one thing I will say is he came and got me. It was amazing then, and it still is amazing now. I finally just threw the keys up in the air and went, okay, whatever your will is, that's what we're doing.
Ryan experienced God's rescuing presence in a hospital room as a middle-aged man. But our next guest, Tia, experienced her rescue at a much younger age.
I was about 4 years old. We had recently moved into a new home. There were 5 kids under 6 years old. There was a lot going on. We had a pool, which was super exciting. My mom was going to teach my brothers and me how to swim. And I recall being outside, and I remember being by myself. So I had looked at the pool. I saw a sock floating, and I was like, well, hey, I'm just going to go pick it up. I walked up onto the deck. I leaned over to pick it up, leaned too far, and ended up falling in. And at the time, I did not know how to swim. So I instantly am, struggling to stay above water. And I'm flailing, and I'm hoping that somebody would see me. And I just keep thinking, someone please come save me. And then I suddenly I felt hands around my torso lift me up above the water so I could actually catch my breath. And I was getting guided to the ladder. I was able to get out, and when I was able to wipe my eyes and kind of open them up and see what was going on, in my mind I thought my dad had come and saved me, but I was still by myself, and there was nobody there. I knew about angels. My first thought was, my guardian angel just saved me. It was just mind-blowing. Everything was just so vivid, and I can still feel like the strength and the love of the hands that were on me. It was just probably one of the most profound experiences in my life.
Oh, I love Tia's story. Sometimes God sends an angel or a miraculous intervention in a pool, and sometimes he sends something or someone more subtle.
My name is Amanda Blackwood, and I'm a survivor of human trafficking. My wow God moment comes from one of the darkest days that I've ever known. I was in the middle of being trafficked. I was 31 years old and stuck in a foreign country, Scotland, being trafficked by a police officer. I had tried everything I could think of to get out of there. I was scared and alone. I didn't have any kind of family relationships. I didn't really have any friendships. Nobody knew where I was, and really nobody cared. All I wanted to do was go home. And I remember when I finally lost hope, I had spent all of my money on an emergency flight trying to get out. And then I missed the flight because of the abuse. It became so bad that I was so sick. It was terrible. And I decided one day that I was going to end my life. I went down to a local church and I sat in the churchyard for a long time talking to a headstone that had long since been worn away by weather. And the only thing that really you could make out was the year. And it said 1776. And I took that as a sign. That was the year that we, as Americans, claimed our independence from England. And that was essentially what I was trying to do again. I was still an American trying to claim my independence from somebody in Scotland. And the whole time I sat there, I talked to this headstone for about an hour. And I kept on saying to myself, somebody's got to come. Somebody will see me. I kept on begging, God, please send somebody to see me. Send somebody to ask if I'm okay. And nobody saw me. Nobody stopped. After about an hour, I got up and I sat on the steps of this church. It was a very old church. I checked the doors first to see if they were locked. And they were. There was nobody there, but it was so old I wasn't surprised. And I sat on the steps of the church and I faced the main street through town. And again, I sat there and begged, please send somebody to see me. Send somebody to ask me if I'm okay. And nobody came. I saw several people walk by or drive by and they looked at me, but then they looked away as though they were thinking to themselves, it's not my problem. Not my circus, not my monkeys. You know, we've heard this saying now for years. And until we are the monkeys, we don't understand the kind of impact that has. I was in the middle of a very dramatic situation in my life, and I needed just one person to stop and look at me and pay attention and acknowledge that I was still a human being, and nobody would stop. Eventually, I made my way down to the train station, and my plan there was to smoke my one last cigarette that I had brought with me. At the time, I was still a smoker. And then I would follow the tracks down the line. And when the train approached, I would throw myself in front of the train, and my pain would be gone. I sat there for a little while. I lit my cigarette and was smoking it when this man walked out onto the platform and he asked me for a light. And I offered him my light. I said, you can keep it. I won't need it anymore. And I said this because I wanted him to ask me why. And he didn't ask. I knew that there was no way that I could get anybody to care about me that day if they didn't already. Nobody was going to ask me if I was okay. Nobody was going to look at me and acknowledge that I was really even a human. I felt less than human with what had been happening. And as I sat there, resigned to ending my life, I eventually got up and I started to head towards the tracks when a little boy came out of the train station and walked up to that man that was smoking a cigarette, and he grabbed his hand. And that little boy looked up at me. And you know how we do when we see a kid who you can tell that they know that we're upset. So we try to put on a happy face so they don't get worried. And we smile for them and we make goofy faces to try and cheer them up. I tried that. It didn't work. This little guy was probably about 4 years old. And when he looked at me, he didn't just look at me and look away like everybody else had. This little boy looked at me and he saw me. He saw my pain and he saw my hope. He saw the humanity in me that nobody else could see. And what I saw in him were the eyes of God. I'd been begging all day long to send somebody to see me. And he sent the innocence of a child to send me that message. And I knew in that moment that I couldn't do to this child what had been done to me when I was about that same age, around 4 years old. That was when my innocence had been taken away. I couldn't do this to him. So I picked myself up and I gathered my emotions and my thoughts, and I started heading back to my prison. And on the way, I found myself strangely rejoicing because I knew that if God was going to keep me alive in that moment, there had to be more purpose to my life, and I wasn't going to die some nameless, faceless thing in Scotland. I was going to be hope for somebody else. And I was thanking God for miracles not yet received. I've never forgotten that day. I've never forgotten that child. It was 12 years ago this year. The little boy would be 16 now. I often think about him and I wonder how he's doing. And I hope that he's not struggling as much as so many 16-year-olds are, but I have a feeling he probably is. And I wish there was some way that I could reach out to this child and let him know that the day he saw me at the railroad tracks was the day he saved my life.
The bottom line of all these stories is this: God knows how to rescue each one of us. And whether it's through a sickness, a near-death experience, a physical intervention in a pool, or a child's eyes, the way the Lord rescues his servants makes me say, wow, God. And to be clear, when I say wow, God, I'm talking about the one true living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the one who makes my heart say,
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God.
My wow God story.
I wanted to share a wow God moment.
That's my wow God story. Praise God.
And I'm so thankful to God for this wow God moment.
So, thank you, God.